From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs, and thank you so much for joining us. Hold on to your hats. We have such a good show, and make sure also that you're following us on social media. All of these radio shows are converted into podcasts. They're on all of the Apple, Spotify, everything you'd expect. They're out there. They're also uploaded on YouTube. Listen to any of the past episodes, 25, 28, something like there. But we have an incredible show for you today. I don't know that we can get through it all. We need to. There's so much out there. But let's hit the highlights as a quick intro. Do we have a RINO problem in Texas? Question mark. Many of us have had those discussions, but guess what? Most of the Republican House members and many of the Republican senators were in Washington, D.C. for a half-day briefing, maybe even longer at the White House. And one of President Trump's senior team members, I believe his Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, many of us know him, leading the fight against illegal immigration, leading the fight on so many social issues, a real deep thinker, substantive policy person, opens his portion of the meeting with, do we have a RINO problem in Texas? Boom. Mic drop. Silence. A member's uncomfortable silence. So we'll get into that and what and why and how. How is the Trump administration wondering about this? Is it merited? We're going to get into it. The U.S. Supreme Court, second issue, we've got to give some time. U.S. Supreme Court right now, struck down in the last 7 days 23 state laws, and they all were very similar. They're bans against speaking with children who identify as transgender. We're talking about minors, children, by their therapists. So a therapist in Colorado, for example, is affirmatively barred and at the risk of the state taking their license away of suggesting that a kid in 8th grade or in junior high, let's say it's a high school counselor even, says, oh, I identify as transgender. It is illegal in Colorado and 22 other states to say, have you considered living as your birth gender or even asking about it? That's how radical and extreme these states have become and the leadership of the state. So we're going to get a deep dive into that. The U.S. Supreme Court, 8-1 in the last week said, that's an illegal ban on free speech. You're only banning one side of the question. You're not banning whether that same counselor can promote to a child that a transgender identity. So huge. And then also, number 3, we've got to spend some time on this because being argued right now in the last few days is the birthright citizenship at the U.S. Supreme Court. And that is, as we know, what the term anchor babies came from. So if somebody comes to the U.S. either legally or illegally as a citizen of another nation, and a week later they have a child, current law says that child's automatically a U.S. citizen. And quite often that child's citizenship is then used to bring in the parents, right, who came here illegally or otherwise. That was the anchor baby issue that we all have come to know and discuss over the last 25, 30 years or so. Got to make sure we get to DEI. CRT, critical race theory, and DEI, the diversity, equity movements. Supposedly, you and I and others were outraged for a number of years, and we outlawed them in theory in Texas. But let me tell you, as is often the case with all these things that we think we beat back, they're alive and well. So DEI in Texas is alive and well, and perhaps the worst part of it, almost all the Republicans in the legislature are in on it, and they're using our tax dollars. The power of the purse. They think it's their purse, but we fill that purse. They just get to allocate it. They're using the power of the purse, our tax money, to lead that charge. They're directing racial quotas with money hanging in balance. That's what it is in our public universities across the board. So we've got to spend some time on that. I think we can get to interim charges as our 5th item. So what are these? Interim charges, many of you may not be familiar with them. The Texas House and the Texas Senate both issue charges on off-cycle years, off-cycle being defined as not in the legislature, right? Well, they only meet 140 days out of every 2 years. So in the interim, they have these interim charges. And that directs a committee or a group of House members or to go and investigate and study a leading policy. And in theory, that research in the interim is then going to be used to advance bills into law to fix policy issues. Both chambers always issue these, but wow, some of these issues that got released recently are going to knock your socks off. So just hold on tight to that. And then, of course, we got to get another week, another news-filled 7 days in the Paxton Cornyn Senate primary. We've got to get to it. Has D.C. surrendered and abandoned Cornyn? It kind of looks that way, but we'll have a discussion about it. And at least one elected member unendorsed Cornyn or said, I never signed up to endorse that guy in the last few days. So that name was pulled. And there was some brouhaha. And then, of course, both candidates have been endorsed by other members, and CPAC occurred, and Paxton won that 80-20, something like that. So we got to make sure we get there. If we have enough time, we really need to spend some time and energy on this $3.3 billion in your tax dollar subsidies, my money, your money, being given to corporate America and international. Frankly, I believe it's also applicable to anybody, any corporation in the world, to build these massive data centers in Texas, right? These are huge consumers of electricity, huge consumers of water. They take a massive footprint, and they're just seas, as I understand them, seas of computer generation, hoovering up our electricity, hoovering up our water. And we have wisdom of the legislature said, hey, we're going to do $3.3 billion in tax subsidies so that you can come in here and build. It looks like it's an 80-20 issue again. So now the legislature is trying to walk some of that back. But, I got to ask right off the bat, why don't we have $3.3 billion in property tax relief? Folks like you and I who are just getting taxed out of our homes. And then we touched on it last week. I'm gonna say it here and now. We really need to get to where we can spend some time on Texas' continued vaccine mandates. After the COVID debacle, we all just assumed that it was outlawed and we had won that battle. Kind of like the DEI claim, DEI is dead in Texas. No, neither are true. There's still vaccine mandates. There's still DEI. These racial quotas are being forced upon Texans by our legislature, and Texans are still losing their jobs and education opportunities over forced vaccination. So we may just have to have Texans for Vaccine Choice folks on sooner, or on a show maybe next week, and have a proper discussion. But if we can get there today, we're going to, because it's important. Thank you. Buckle up. Here we go. Anthony Holm, Politics with the Big Dogs. It's time to get into the meat of the show.
More with Anthony Holm coming up in just a minute. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. While you're there, make sure you listen to our previous episodes of Politics with the Big Dogs. Politics with the Big Dogs is brought to you by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Got a question for Anthony Holm? Email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. Now, more with Anthony Holm on Politics with the Big Dogs.
All right, folks. So picture this. The bulk of the Republican caucus of the House and a whole bunch of Republican senators are doing a half day or so parade through the White House, doing senior private meetings. Trump or Texas, we're all in it together. You're our people. And it begins in part with Stephen Miller. Many of you should know him. He's I believe, Deputy Chief of Staff of the White House, but a senior leader, certainly on policy, out front in the border wars, smart guy, classically policy-oriented, in its classical sense, right? Just clean lines, bam, 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 and aggressive in his demeanor. So he leads off, do we have a rhino problem in Texas? Silence in the room is what has been reported. And by the way, this was all broken by Current Revolt. So that's an online news agency here in Texas. More and more the last year and a half, 2 years, I've begun to follow them. I think they're 5 or 6 years old. And my observation is a bit of a transition from more of like almost a TMZ style to substantive news and huge breaking news. They've broken some of the bigger stories in the last year. So shout out to those guys, and you all might want to keep your eyes on them. But let's go back to the White House. I mean, imagine this. You're in a private closed door meeting. There's 50, 60, 70 R's, something like that from Texas. And Stephen Miller opens up. Do we have a rhino problem in Texas? Uncomfortable silence, says a state representative Republican who was there. We have talked about the rhino situation on policy. I don't know. I necessarily want to call a bunch of these people rhinos, but I will suggest to you that Texas has been late training on major policy. And I've had a working theory, and it may apply here. My working theory is largely this. Our friends at TLR, and we've talked a lot about Texans for Lawsuit Reform, by far the biggest lobby group in Texas. Huge amounts of money to Democrats, 6 million plus in Texas. Huge amounts of money to Republicans, and I think they have $50 million in their PAC right now, certainly over 30 million. So I have long premised that, if these guys voted with TLR on tort reform issues, then they didn't have to vote for lower taxes or banning DEI or even passing voter ID. I mean, I bet many of you don't remember That's a reasonably new law. I helped champion it. Most Republicans opposed having voter ID in Texas elections until about 15 years ago when we finally passed it and took a few sessions. So I've long had this running notion that, these guys get $250,000, $500,000, $1 million. Some of these members are $1 million plus in the campaign accounts as a result of TLR. And so they didn't have to be policy oriented on any other subject matter. And frankly, of late, we've talked about many of these policies that TLR's advance is not conservative from my perspective, and I've explained why. So I do wonder if on policy, we don't have a RINO problem in Texas, and in large part because you can get massive amounts of funding as long as you vote with one group on one issue, and you can ignore all the rest. I really believe that this has been impairing conservatives, activists like you and I for a long, long time. So, but now let's go back. Let's go back to the White House. Stephen Miller, do we have a RINO problem in Texas? I mean, it's just so brazen, right? And these elected officials are accustomed to folks just bending the knee and praising them and thank you for being here, and thank you just for blessing us with your face. And here somebody's holding them to task, just like you do and I do, about policy outcomes. And this somebody's a big deal. He's in the right hand of President Trump. So I'm sure they're all intimidated and scared. And then he starts to outline. He's like, the U.S. Supreme Court's had great rulings. How come Republican state like Texas, which is known as this beacon of conservative values, and I think many of us would question if that's true. And last week we spent a bunch of time on big business versus free enterprise. We're not a bastion of free enterprise. We are pretty much beholden to big business, and will do just about anything, like the $3.3 billion in data centers, right? So he says, Miller is being reported that he goes on and says, what about stopping funding public education in Texas for illegals? What about stopping funding free health care for illegals? What about taking affirmative acts that protect the law-abiding citizens who are paying taxes and funding all this, right? We're trying to close the border, but isn't it an inducement to people to come across to get free health care because they know they can go to the county hospital and your Texans will pick up the tab in their taxes? What about other state subsidies for illegals? You have the power to not fund those. You have the power to pass a law, say, we're not going to fund for those things, and disincentivize a behavior to come across. Well, somewhere along the way, state representative, constitutional conservative, Andy Hopper. You guys know this. He's a first term. He's a hardcore activist. Ironically, TLR tried to defeat him in his primary here. Andy won 70-30 or 80-20 a few weeks ago. But yeah, TLR, again, if all these guys get funded, $250,000, $500,000, $1 million in their campaigns by TLR, and then they don't have to, nobody takes them to task on policies like this, helping stop illegal immigration and illegal entry into the U.S. and lowering property taxes and truly ending DEI or the vaccine mandates. It's if you vote for big business, then we're going to fund you. So here's Hopper. He pops up in the middle of this White House deal and he says, guess what, guys? I filed that bill. I couldn't even get a hearing committee. I believe that's what he said, but he certainly didn't get out of committee. So now there's this group of Republicans, all hem and haw, and some get out and leave. Some of the Texas state reps get up and just walk out. They didn't want to hear it. They want to hear anything critical to this end. Okay, that's all right. And it's reported that another House member yelled in the room, well, that bill had a sponsor problem. What can we reasonably glean from that? Here's what I glean from it. That means that good policy dies in the Texas House because of the person who filed it and not the merits of the bill. Folks, that's a real issue in both the House and the Senate, period. Personalities are driving outcomes instead of policy. There's plenty of House members and senators that I probably wouldn't be friends with out in the real world, right? It's more of a working relationship than anything. But how does that intervene in terms of policy outcomes for the 31 million Texans? Perhaps it's human nature to allow that to occur, but don't these 150 House members have a higher duty to us, to the 31 million of us, even if they don't like somebody, to hold their nose if it's good policy and go move it? I suggest to you that a constitutional conservative believes that and acts that way. And if somebody is a real conservative, they're going to advance policy that is good, even if it's advanced by somebody they don't care for. Fast forward a few days, And Andy Hopper, that strong conservative up in North Texas who filed the bill and couldn't get it out of committee. I don't believe he even got a committee hearing on it. And of course, who TLR targeted, perhaps just for these reasons, having the ability to stand alone. He goes out into X, or formerly Twitter, and says, hey, if I'm the issue to move this issue, then I give it to you, member who is critical of me. You take it and go do it. And by the way, I'll vote for it because I want to vote for policy. So here it is, House leadership, take it. Go do it. If I'm hurting it, I surrender. Somebody else move it. Somebody else who you like, go move it. So we'll see, but it should not be lost on us that the White House had to intervene and call and ask a question. Do we have a RINO problem for good policy to potentially maybe move next session? But we've lost 2 years of it. No way around it. Now, we can have a fair and open policy debate whether we as Texas taxpayers should be funding the public education for students who are here illegally. We can have a fair and open debate that has pros and cons of funding health care for people who have entered the U.S. illegally. I think that is a righteous and merited debate. But to just simply say, we won't move that bill or that policy or even debate it on the floor because of the person who filed it, frankly, it's pretty cowardice from my perspective. I will suggest, again, I'm not going to call a member a RINO, but I'm going to suggest that we have a RINO approach to a lot of policy. And this is at least the second time I can immediately think of that the Trump White House said to intervene. Actually, it's the third time, right? Redistricting, this one that we just talked about. And then let's not forget that foreign trucker bill. So this is, again, advanced by the TLR forces. What they wanted to do, they had a bill, and I believe it passed the Senate, actually, and it died in the House. Hallelujah. But it said that, hey, if you're a foreign truck driver, driving on a foreign CDL, semi-truck driver, and you crash into somebody, current Texas law says the jury automatically learns that you had a foreign CDL. Well, we want to change that so they don't automatically learn. Only if your foreign CDL caused the crash. Well, that's pretty tough to prove, folks. So effectively, they wanted to keep it out. And TLR wants to protect big business and these insurance companies. They know that if you or I or other people like us are on a jury in Texas and some guy's driving on a Cuban CDL and kills a bunch of people, T-bones them, and clearly doesn't know what he's doing, that we're going to punish him. We're going to make sure that family is made whole. Well, Trump came out in the middle of session, and this poor old Jeff Leach, a Republican from Plano, had this bill, and it was all pushed by TLR. He was under all the pressure of the biggest donors. The bill also said the same thing. Current Texas law says if you can't speak English and you're driving a semi, jury automatically learns that. If you can't read English, you're driving a semi and you're in a crash, jury automatically learns that. So TLR and Jeff Leach and this group of Republicans advancing what I'll say is RINO policy, bad policy, said, no, we want to change the law. Jury shouldn't automatically know if you're driving on a foreign CDL, a Cuban CDL. Jury shouldn't automatically know if you can't read English. Shouldn't automatically know in Texas if you can't speak English. And they about passed it into law. In fact, I'm virtually certain that Dan Patrick, I'm not sure that he paid that much attention to the policy because that's not his style. But he moved this bill through the Senate chamber, and all those senators, they're on record with a really bad vote now. And Jeff Leach tried to move it through the House, but while he was Leach was moving it, Trump came out and said, these foreign truckers are killing too many Americans. This is a safety issue. I am issuing an executive order that it is unsafe to drive on a foreign CDL and should be revoked. It is unsafe if you can't speak English. They need their licenses revoked. It is unsafe if you can't read English. So now, and they need the licenses revoked. So that's the third time I can immediately think of that the Trump White House had to intervene on bad policy and or issues by the Texas Republican legislature, Republican-led legislature, right? So now they're all up there in the White House. Hey, what's the RINO problem? How come you haven't done this, this, and this? Oh, well, we don't like the guy who filed it. Okay. Is it bad policy? Can somebody else not file it? There's 149 other members. Why didn't any of you file it? I think the truth is, because the Democrats hold a lot of sway in the legislature and they don't want it filed. And there's a bunch of moderate Republicans who probably don't want to have to go out and debate that issue, right? It is what it is. That'll be a tough debate. no, we shouldn't educate children who are here because their parents brought them here illegally. I see both sides of that, and I see it being a real tough debate. But I'm very troubled when a member of House leadership just pops up and says, oh, yeah, that bill was killed because we didn't like the author. Now you're not legislating policy. You're legislating by people's personalities. That is a disservice to the 31 million Texans that we have here. And I expect more out of them. I think you expect more out of the legislature. And certainly we deserve more and we deserve better. I'd give this more time, but we've got to move on. The U.S. Supreme Court. Okay, we've got to hit that here in just a second. Oh, my goodness. There's just so much. And by the way, of course, I'm a lawyer. This leads us to temper time. It's one of the reasons I'm talking about all these laws and following the U.S. Supreme Court as it struck down the Colorado ban and implicitly the 22 other states that banned speaking to children who may identify themselves as transgender. That's our second topic, and we're just about to cut into it. So let's take a quick break, and we'll come right to it.
Thanks, Anthony. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at politicswiththebigdogs.com. We'll keep you informed on new episodes, new guests, and new opportunities for your voice to be heard across Texas. Learn more and sign up today at politicswiththebigdogs.com.
All right, folks, so we're back. This is amazing action. Two big events by the U.S. Supreme Court. Hallelujah, bringing some sanity. And this one was 8-1, so all the Democrats except one, the most radical activist, Justice Ketanji, I believe is how she pronounces, Brown Jackson. She was the only one to dissent. So who'd have thunk it, right? 23 states, all Democrat-led states. The radical D left has just been pushing this transgender. Children have no gender. It's all fluidity. Much like Tallarico's, science has clearly defined we have 6 genders, not 2, but 6. And we're still waiting for Mr. Tallarico to tell us what the other 4 are. But here we are. The state of Colorado, it was challenged. So the state of Colorado is one of 23 states that have the same or similar law that effectively says, hey, if you're a therapist, if you're a counselor, if you're anyone who interfaces with a minor who's having gender identification concerns, meaning primarily that they believe they're transgender, or they're a little boy born into really trapped in the body of a boy, but they should be a girl, or pansexual, insert whatever you want in here of the radical activists' approach to our children's sexual identification. So 23 states said, hey, we passed a law, and all these legislators voted for it, that affirmatively bars a therapist, a counselor, or anybody else from having a discussion about this child's gender identification and suggesting in any way, shape, or form that child should try to live or consider living as the gender that they were born as. That was ineloquent, if that is a word, but affirmatively bars words, notions, thoughts, insinuations that, hey, 9-year-old, why don't you consider living life as a boy for a while and seeing if that works for you if you were born a boy? Or, hello, young lady who's 13, why don't you consider if life would be easier for the next 6 weeks if you lived as a girl and then checked in with yourself? Affirmatively illegal, they can lose their license, right? And we've talked in the past on the show, if you're a regular listener, of how regulated many states are. Texas is one of the most regulated, right? All these people have licenses and they're controlled, and they can't work in their trades or their professions unless the state gives them authority. So these 23 states, I'm sure California is one of them, certainly this one is Colorado, all said, you're going to lose it. If a kid comes up and says you were suggesting or insinuating that they should live as their birth gender, you're out. Your career and your livelihood is 100% at risk. They actually pass laws restricting the free speech of the therapists. And then separately, I think there's 2 big policy principles that we should all be acutely aware of. Number one, free speech of therapists, just straight up, because they said you cannot suggest they live as their birth gender. Oh, but there's no bar the other direction. But you can sure suggest somebody who was walking in as a boy and says, I'm having some problems getting along with other people. Well, maybe you're a little boy who's really trapped in the body of a boy who's a girl. Or maybe you're transgender. Do you think that could be the basis? There's no bar of that. In fact, I suggest to you that these states are advocating that. And certainly the school systems in many places, to include Texas, are often advocating that. I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. Give me a child who believes they are a gender other than their birth gender, and I will give you I will find the adult in close proximity who have poisoned their thoughts to that end. And I think it's a real shame, perhaps a child abuse. I'll go that far as to say it. But in the here and now, a brave therapist in Colorado said, hey, you have violated my free speech. And then the second prong of that is, even if they believe it's in their best medical interest, if if a therapist or a counselor, I'm sorry, I got sidetracked and I left out my other policy prong. There's two of them, right? One is free speech violation. Number two, what about the Hippocratic Oath, which we were familiar with, doctors do no harm and only aid the patient. And there are similar oaths of therapists and counselors, right? They are trained professionals dealing with mental health of children in this instance, and we have banned them from providing the mental health treatment that they think is best. If that treatment is, guess what? You sound a little bit confused. Maybe you got caught up in some social media, and I'm going to suggest to you you're a 13-year-old boy just going through puberty, and that is not abnormal. That has been barred. So a very brave therapist in the state of Colorado takes it all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they rule against them, of the state of Colorado and all those other states, and says this is a violation of free speech. It prohibits treatment that, quote, attempts or purports to change a minor's sexual orientation or gender identity, but it doesn't apply to treatments assisting minors undergoing gender transition away from their biological sex. It's one-sided, top to bottom, and we know why it's occurring, right? Like the radical left has been just rabid at trying to transition our children. I can't, away from their natural birth gender. I just can't believe that this continues. And little sidebar here, it's one of the many reasons I'm not very concerned about a governor from any of these states being elected president, because it's a 2080 issue against. They're just pandering to the most radical left who are dressing up as cows and choosing to live as children. And then the fact that these states have these laws is just shocking to me. I bet it's shocking to you, but we keep finding them. I remind us of the thruples, right? That was three men usually living as a family and all getting the right to adopt, full paternity right, a child. So three people, and they're all living together. We are a 3-unit family. Well, that's legalized in a whole bunch of states. We did a full episode on it, and you can go to Spotify or Apple or pull up any of those podcasts, and they're on YouTube, and you'll see the thruples episode where I broke down. Lo and behold, all these states allow this. Just shocking. You know it's pretty extreme when Elena Kagan and Sotomayor, the two of the three hardcore D justices, are like, no, this is wrong, just 100% wrong, and it's illegal. So when it doesn't help them, it doesn't allow them to help a minor reject the experience of being transgender. I mean, that's the bottom line. It bars them from helping a child say, no, I'm not transgender, I'm a boy, or I'm a girl. And, it's just, I almost don't know how to say it. There's just no way around it. These state legislators and through using their power of the purse and are pushing it in the schools or pushing it across the board that little boys need to live and identify as girls or transgender. And they passed a law so sane adults who are mental health professionals and licensed in those states cannot help unwind that notion. I mean, it's really just sick. So these states threaten all the licenses of the therapists and the counselors. We're just overregulated as a society, and clear, and very much in Texas. We've talked about that. So the U.S. Supreme Court struck it down 8-1. Hallelujah. And it's crazy policies like this. And these, I think, will be picked up and defeat whoever the Democratic nominee is, be it Gavin Newsom or somebody else who's leading a state and has been pushing this stuff. And then, it's worth noting, it's not absolute data. I don't think it's rock solid, but the graph of the number of children who identify as transgender or a gender other than their birth gender, it was just going up, almost skyrocketing for like 7-8 years. And then it turned and it pitched down hard. So meaning the fewer and fewer and fewer. And that trend line did not a 180, but, probably 140 degree downward from a massive upward slope where it's in the social conscious and it's all over social media and adults are talking it up and parents are encouraging their kids. Our children learn from us. And then it's this steep downward trend, fewer and fewer and fewer every month and every year. And that inflection point is when Elon Musk bought Twitter. and changed it to X. Sit with that a moment. We don't know that it's causation. I bet it is. My gut tells me it is, but it's certainly correlation. Within months of Elon Musk buying Twitter, renaming it X, and basically getting that nonsense, I think, out of the top of the feeds, we just saw children identifying as transgender plummeting down. And the exact opposite was going on in the years prior to that purchase. So look, there's a lot of gazillionaires out there in the world, but not many of them are affecting social change the way Elon Musk has. And I gotta give him credit. You know, I don't think he's a hard right guy at all. In fact, he has a history with D. But as my understanding is, the last few years, he said, no, it's just, they're just too nuts. They're doing things like this, and we've got to intervene. And he's done it largely in the market system. He put a whole bunch of his money into Donald Trump. I applaud him for that. He overpaid for Twitter, poor guy. I mean, he's still going to live well, and his kids are going to live well, right? I think he's the wealthiest person on the planet. But nonetheless, he overpaid for Twitter, which is or has been, and was certainly at the time, the marketplace of ideas and debate in America. And look at what happened just on that one issue. Children identifying as transgender just plummeted. And it's probably because adults were filling their minds with this nonsense. So, all right, we've got to move on to another issue. Birthright citizenship in the U.S. and DEI in Texas. We just got to get to them. They're too important. This is Anthony Holm, Politics with the Big Dogs. Make sure you're signed up on our newsletter. Make sure you're following us on social media, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. All of them are there. Make sure you're joining us. Here we go, folks. On to the next topic. Birthright citizenship in the United States. Does it exist? So a huge undertaking this week. The U.S. Supreme Court, at the behest of President Trump, appears to me that they're going to have to decide, what does the 14th Amendment mean? It's the 14th Amendment that we currently use to give birthright citizenship, meaning that if someone comes here illegally, they stepped across the border, and 1 minute later they have a baby, that child becomes a U.S. citizen. So first, let's back up a little bit and talk about some of our foundational events that got us here. So we're all familiar with the Constitution in 1776, Declaration of Independence, and getting after it. Well, we talk about the Bill of Rights, but I want to make sure we all have some foundational information. So the Bill of Rights are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. They actually weren't in the Constitution, but they were all memorialized within about 10 years of the founding of our nation, right? And those were codified into constitutional powers to ensure that individual liberty exists, individual liberty and freedom, and really to free us from the government, right? The First Amendment, the Second Amendment, right to bear arms against the government, the right to speak against the government, to ensure that the inalienable values of the individual will be put ahead of the powers of the government. Because again, we had just overthrown a monarchy. We had overthrown unfair taxation. We had overthrown and fled religious persecution because there was a state religion, right? So we had this value alignment. So the Bill of Rights all were amendments to the Constitution that came to be about 10 or 12 years after the founding of the nation, and they're the first 10 amendments. And then over the next like 70, 80 years, well into the 1800s, we start doing Amendment 11, 12, 13, and 14. And it's the 14th Amendment that has been interpreted to allow any person who born in the United States, with some exceptions, but effectively any person, to have automatic citizenship, whether they're here legally or not. And then many of the listeners, I think, are familiar with this, but you might not realize that we do have some affirmative exceptions, right? So, for example, diplomats. If a diplomat from a foreign country is here and working at an embassy or a consulate office and is not subject to the laws, right, because they have diplomatic immunity, we've all probably heard that term, they have a child, that child is not automatically a citizen of the United States. We also have, I think, and most legal scholars, I believe, agree, a carve out for like a hostile occupation. If we had foreign soldiers enter our lands and one of them had a child, that child would not automatically be a U.S. citizen. And then at the time, frankly, we had an express carve out for American Indians, right? Because they didn't have the same citizenship powers. So it's this really interesting legal event. And again, guys, we have temper time now. All these moderate R's and rhinos that are offended that claim that folks don't realize I'm a lawyer. Yes, I am, and have an LLM and everything else, and I actively go to trial and the whole thing. So I'm getting a little bit deep in the law, but I think it's important. The 14th Amendment, which was ratified by the states in 1868, just after the Civil War, and it actually says all persons born or naturalized in the United States, comma, and that comma is important. So here we go on. And subject to the jurisdiction thereof, comma, are citizens of the United States, close quote, period. So I flagged those commas because that's a big deal. And in the law, putting a comma in one place is what the teachers unions do, and they change the meaning of the law, and we think we're doing good, and they get us. But so people born here, and then there's plus another clause. There's and plus subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And this phrase is really important, because subject to the jurisdiction thereof is why diplomats' kids, for example, are not, or a hostile invading force would not qualify. And at the time, the American Indians, right, because they weren't subject to it. They were on their tribal laws. I think that the debate is going to stem around what does the clause and subject to the jurisdiction thereof mean, right? So the Democrats, for example, want to count illegal folks here illegally in the census. Does that mean that they're subject to the laws of the U.S.? I mean, does an illegal pay taxes? Are they subject to taxation? It's a very interesting legal quandary that the U.S. Supreme Court may well be in. And then the court had a ruling about 30, 40 years later, right around the turn of the century in 1898, where there was a debate whether somebody, a Chinese guy whose parents lived in San Francisco and he was born here, if he qualified for birthright citizenship. And the court said, here's one of the blurbs. This has been widely reported in the Wall Street Journal and some of the others, but it's an important blurb. The 14th Amendment affirms the ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship by birth within the territory. And that's a close quote. So, okay, anybody born within the territory gives an ancient and fundamental rule of citizenship. Then it goes on to say, and this is the second part of the quote, all children here born of resident aliens, close quote, right? Okay, so now anybody who's a resident alien would qualify according to the Supreme Court ruling in 1898. And there are the few exceptions being obviously the foreign diplomats and hostile occupiers and Native American tribal nations. So I think the legal debate will be primarily born of resident aliens, because President Trump, through a Solicitor General, and the solicitor wrote a brief on this. If anyone wants to find it, they can just, do a search on Solicitor General Sauer's, Sauer's brief to the court, which basically says, hey, this notion that illegal and anchor babies are citizens basically came around President Roosevelt's time, and it's been misinterpreted. And I know of at least one other instance where we have all just taken for granted these misinterpretations. And I've had lots of Republican lawyers argue with me along the way. And then finally we got out of pre-clearance in our election lines, right? It was very clear to me and some of the other people who had looked deeply on it, but I had the vast majority of lawyers to tell me wrong, wrong, wrong. And it went away. It just became nomenclature. And this is one of the things that the media and the left tries to do. So they're trying to just create this notion that, oh, it's separation of church and state. Well, you really actually need to read and look at that. Oh, they're born here, therefore they're a citizen. Maybe, but I think there's a fair argument to make on the other side of this notion, right? And then we just have a policy decision. Even if that is the law, do we want to try and change it? Like maybe, crisis occur. So, does subject to the laws of the United States and subject to the control and the governance and born of resident aliens, does it qualify? It appears to me that the Trump administration is saying that, hey, it really what qualifies is, do we owe a direct and immediate allegiance to the nation and may claim its protection, right? That's one of the lines. So the administration's arguing that, you got to be completely subject to. You're not paying taxes. You're not governed. If you don't owe a duty and allegiance to the nation, we pledge allegiance to America, right, every day. If you don't qualify as this, then you don't get the protections that come with automatic birthright citizenship. It's really, really interesting. And then they have, I think, a pretty novel, if not compelling argument where they're saying, hey, this class of people, this profile of people, they lack the legal capacity to form a domicile, right? They're here illegally. They cannot just create a family and a life and a home because they don't have the right to be here. And as a result, they are not subject to the laws, protections, powers, nor do they have the allegiance to our nation that is required to earn the right of birthright citizenship. Fascinating, like really, really interesting. So I don't know how it's going to go, right? Traditionally, the courts, even the U.S. Supreme Court, likes to just make slight changes and little tiny deviations from precedent. This would be a pretty big break from precedent, but I don't know there's a ton of precedent, and I don't also know that this hasn't been thought out the way it needs to be, right? Like when the amendment was passed and when these laws and these other interpretations were created, we didn't really have much immigration issue. We just had people kind of coming and going, and it wasn't a controlled border the way it is. And I don't think we even had INS, frankly. We were pretty much inviting most people in. We know through history that the Irish didn't have the same rights when they came, and certainly the Chinese didn't when they came, and Puerto Rico has similar but not the exact same rights. So there's a real question of where the line is drawn, who is under the protections of the sovereign, our nation, right? And who owes allegiance to it, and who do we being authority over and control the citizen-led government actually have. Fascinating event, not being covered the same way that I would expect it to be covered. And I think there's a really interesting, if not potentially strong argument to say that clause, and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is met. Was it subject to some of the jurisdiction? Subject to all of the jurisdiction, right? Like some nations don't allow the same punishments in the criminal system that we do. And if we in the U.S. had somebody who was here illegally and committed a crime, we try to subject them to it, that nation would argue that we don't have the power. That's a citizen of the other nation. It's happened before. And, for example, the death penalty, when we've tried to bring people out of other countries, and they're like, well, we don't honor the death penalty. You can't do it to this person. We have to commit that we will not. And independent of how you feel about the death penalty, that says a lot about the powers of the other states relative to their citizenry, number one. And then number two, right on point, potentially at least here, of are they under the power of the state? Does it qualify for that phrase that is so essential to this, right? Subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Well, that profile of person who we've had to take the death penalty off the table for is arguably subject to the jurisdiction of this nation, but perhaps not all of it, right? Because if you were a U.S. citizen and you were here, you might face the death penalty for treason. But if you're a citizen of another state and you're being extradited to the U.S., then So I think it's a fascinating legal approach. Thank you for indulging on some of the legalese of it. I hope that I did it justice and service and made it consumable in non-legal terms. That was my goal and my effort. But what's most important here is, does the United States actually have a birthright citizenship in all accounts? Meaning that somebody can come here illegally, cross the border, and 1 minute later have a kid, and that kid is a U.S. citizen. There's a real question to that under the law. It's a massive policy issue. We've been fighting it forever and a day. We called it anchor babies. When I say we, it's you and me and other people who follow policy and taxation and disproportionate funding and usurping of our rights and opportunities to ensure that people who may not be a citizen and certainly didn't come here legally benefit from all the beautiful gifts that we have in this incredible nation. So, Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. If you haven't signed up for our newsletter, please do so. I know that we've got a bunch of issues to get through, but I wanted to flag this for us because we'll come back. If the listeners, if you guys have questions about it, email, call, or otherwise, and we'll get it going for you. And we will for sure break it down again after the court rules. So, but we got to move on to our next topic, DEI. We all were up in arms over critical race theory and DEI in our schools and across government. We, you and I, the activists, forced the politicians to, in theory, ban it. But let me tell you, let me just be real clean about it. DEI is alive and well, and the Republicans are advancing it just straight up. So they're doing it primarily in the budget. They're using our tax dollars that they control, and a lot of those appropriation decisions and the outlining of these subjects in the budget are being done by Democrats. Democrats in the Texas House have a lot of power, less so in the Senate, but they still have quite a bit of power. So let's look at some of these things. $25 million in the budget for minority health research and education, exclusively non-white health research and education. But that's not the most appalling. There's lots of examples like this. You can just go through the budget. It's an online document. You can look at them for yourself. What I'm most troubled about are some of our best institutions. The UT system, many of our medical centers, our dental schools, these are state subsidized organizations that the legislature through the budget are putting racial quotas on. So let's look at some of the medical schools. You have to admit at least 31% or more of students in 26 and 27 who are minority, meaning non-white, right? They want at least 30% in 2026 because the budget's for a 2-year, and then at least 31% or more in both in 27. And again, it was in 26 was 30% or more. That's for UT Southwestern Medical Center. And they sometimes they use the language like use best efforts. And then they put will be audited, will be reviewed. So what this means, it means, hey, if you want this much or more money next time, you're going to make sure you have 30% of your class being non-white or more in 26, and you're going to have 31% or more being non-white in 27. Same thing with UTMB Medical School at Galveston. They're voting on, I assume they all know this, or most of them know it. It is just a workaround. And the other way they do it is called hubs, historically underutilized businesses. And they carve out a big chunk of the budget dollars to be sent to hubs, right? And you'll remember in the comptroller's office, we had acting comptroller Kelly Hancock on, who is now or was in the primaries, defeated by Huffines, and Don Huffines will be the next comptroller on or before January. But nonetheless, Kelly Hancock, acting comptroller at the time, was on this show, and he said, one thing that I found at the comptroller's office was this big old hub business, historically underutilized business. And that's a minority, that's a DEI, and the legislature was mandating it happen. Well, I changed it to heroes and something else and made it apply to armed forces, veterans, and a few others, but including white people, right? Like, we just still have racial quotas. And you and I and the activists thought we had killed CRT, thought we had killed DEI. Those two things are clearly linked. I thought we had killed hubs too, given racial preferences. Certainly, it is illegal, period, to give a racial preference in higher ed. We have Edward Bloom, who's been on this show, has been leading that legal charge. The U.S. Supreme Court's shown it over and over again, from UT Law to Harvard to elsewhere. Trump's civil rights organization is going after these race quotas. It wouldn't surprise me at all after this show, now that's been exposed, that they engage in some way, shape, or form. We are telling white medical school candidates, guess what? 30% of the class can't look like you because the Texas legislature is funding UT Southwestern, funding Galveston Medical School. I mean, that's appalling. Oh, the Texas Dental School, same thing. At least 37% of admissions must be minority. Okay, so guess what? Uh, 1 out of 3 white people, you don't get to go. Period. Even if you have higher scores, you're a better qualified candidate. We're just going to race place people. Period. And we being the state government of Texas, are using our tax dollars as the hook. They're weaponizing our taxes to advance policy I argue is against conservative values, whether you're Anglo or not. It doesn't matter. Racial preferences are fundamentally wrong, and they are not in keeping with a merit-based public policy approach to governance. And that's certainly on this show. We are egalitarians, and merit overcomes, and logic and reason and good policy overcomes, independent of the color of your skin. We pick people up for the power of their ideas and the outcomes that they produce. Yet the Texas budget is top to bottom littered with DEI. I'm so unhappy to stumble upon this. So the technical colleges have to graduate a minimum number of minorities. It's in the budget. We're going to fund you, and this is the allocation that you need to beat. Just straight up racial quotas in spending our tax dollars. West Texas State Technical College shall make every effort to ... The number of minority students graduated annually, 149 in 2026 and 177 in 2027. See Article 3, Section 276, which is page 546 of the Texas budget. I mean, would you ever imagine Republican-led legislature, Republican House, Republican Senate writing out West Texas State Technical College, here's what we're appropriating for you. You shall make every effort to graduate at least 149 minority students in 2026 and at least 177 minority students in 2027. So what's this mean in practical terms? You know, this is the RINO approach, or the Democrat, probably just the smart Democrat approach of, oh, we're going to get around this racial preference. We're going to say make every effort to, and we're going to put it in the budget document, and we're going to say that we're auditing you because it's tax dollars, and we're going to review your compliance. And if you want to get same or similar amounts in the next 2-year budget cycle, these matter. And if you're an educator or someone running that institution, what are you looking at? I mean, holy smokes, I only have 141 qualified minorities to graduate. I've got to find 8. I need to meet my number. I mean, that's human nature. So we can play this game like best effort. But we know what it is. You know what it is. It's in a budget document. It's in an appropriating document. Oh, here's how much we're giving you. You should thank us. And we're mandating these outcomes, or you might not get it again. And you're going to have a big old jump. 149 to 177 is a big jump. That's a 20% increase in minority graduates, not even admissions now. Now we're going to instruct you to graduate this number of minorities, this number of non-whites. And, you know, there's no issue about merit in there. There's nothing saying, hey, make sure they qualify across the board. It's straight up numbers by race. I think it's affirmatively illegal. I'm appalled by it. Another one, Texas State Technical College of North Texas. See Article 3, 283-283. Number of minority students graduated annually, ... 74, 81. So you better graduate at least 74 minorities in 2026 and at least 81 in 2027. Is this what we want? Do we want to allocate in our budget $500,000 of our tax monies for, quote, minority groups and underserved communities? I actually don't mind individuals in underserved communities being targeted for aid with government dollars. That's not offensive to me. The fact is, what is offensive to me is that they have to be minority, number one. I think there's a whole bunch of white people in underserved communities who could also benefit from any programs or aid or assistance up that our government with our tax dollars is offering. Now, this line item that I was just reading is also in Article 3-43, part of the Workforce Commission. but they're setting aside $500,000 of our tax dollars exclusively to go to minority groups, race-oriented mandated groups, period. Non-white, fundamentally illegal, fundamentally unconstitutional, and I believe, most importantly, fundamentally wrong. So I'm troubled by anything that is race mandated. It lacks merit on its face, and it goes against the merit system. I'm also troubled that we had all these Republicans denounce DEI and say it was gone, and they had voted it out of existence. CRT, no, be gone. Again, poor old Tepper, he got caught advocating for CRT when he ran. It took $1 million from TLR to come in to get him through and into the legislature. And then he couldn't get away from it quickly enough. And of course, now he's voted for a budget that's just littered with DEI, racial quotas, hub mandates, $1.8 million to minority health programs only. So, read non-white health programs. We already talked about the $25 million to minority health research and education, Section 3, Article 3, Section 19-55. I mean, these are easy to find. Just start putting minority or racial quota in keyword searches in the budget. These are really conspicuous, and for sure, dozens of Republicans knew they were in there. And perhaps not all the Republicans who voted for the budget, but my goodness, is this what we want? Is this part of our value system in Texas? Is this part of our value system in the party? And I suggest it's affirmatively illegal. I mean, when you and I and the activists who are paying attention have to basically call in the feds on Republicans violating the law, like foundational portions of the law, violating foundational portions of our values and our political belief system, kind of leads back to what we led off with. Hey, do we have a RINO problem in Texas? Maybe. I mean, I'll bet you the Trump administration does not take kindly to racial quotas in the Texas budget. So I don't want to say that it's RINOs as much as I'd like to say it's people not thoughtful about policy, number one, and probably more likely, or just as likely, at least not paying attention. And this is how a Shelby Slauson, who's a pretty smart lawyer by all accounts, ends up as co-author of that foreign truck driver bill, right? Like, I keep going back to it because it's such a good example. It's so patently wrong and against all of our values. And everything I've gotten from mutual friends is the folks of Stephenville would never support that, and neither would Shelby Slauson. In fact, a state rep from Stephenville area, and they don't want somebody can't read or speak English driving an 18-wheeler up there. And she's like, oh, that's not in the bill. I would never vote for that. I'd never support that. Well, you're a co-author of the bill, and here it is, just big as Dallas. It's really clear. So there's a whole bunch of Republicans who aren't paying attention, and they're just saying, oh, it's a TLR bill, or it's a Dan Patrick bill, or it's a this bill, or whatever they're calling it. And they're saying, yeah, I'm in as a co-author, or, oh, you're $1 million donor, or $500,000 to my, okay, no problem, I'm in. Yet it's really flawed policy. And then there's another segment, probably these members who don't understand policy at the depth and the level that you and I expect them to. And that might be as scary as any of it, because we've controlled the state for 30 years and we've still not really lowered property taxes, and we just got educational choice, and we're still battling taxpayer-funded lobbying, and it took 10-ish years to get voter ID after we had controlled all the chambers. So the policy chops and the policy positions of our elected officials in the legislature are pretty suspect to substantive people like you and like me and others. But bottom line is DEI is alive and well in Texas. We got a bunch of issues we want to get through today. I'm just going to have to transition, I think, this radio show at some point into a longer form, probably video, so we can get through as much as we want and we need and get some of you more involved. DEI is alive and well. We have a birthright citizenship debate going on in the Supreme Court. That'll be fascinating. The U.S. Supreme Court, hallelujah, struck down Colorado and 22 other states that had bans against therapists and clinicians talking children away from their transgender indoctrination. And then, of course, Do we have a RINO problem in Texas? That was the lead. That was Stephen Miller opening up this big discussion that at the White House with Trump. We talked about Trump intervening in a few different policy issues and leading the way for Texas, and then now we have DEI clear as Dallas in the budget throughout. I just grabbed 6 or 7 of the examples, but it's throughout the thing, guys. We have a real policy problem for sure. And if we can get this in, right, it's another week in the Paxton Cornyn issue. And it's just fascinating. Paxton goes to CPAC. He has a big victory. Cornyn picks up a bunch of, frankly, what I think are the 8 or 9 the larger funded state reps funded by TLR. Of course, TLR, we know, was actively involved in not leading the impeachment of Paxton and got exposed for it. And then at least one of those state reps said, no, I didn't endorse Cornyn, take my name off that. So crazy things going on. It appears to me that D.C. has abandoned Cornyn. I'd really like to know the answer to that, and we're running out of time in this show to get into it deeply. Frankly, if you want to go and catch the rest of the show on any of the podcasts, Spotify, Apple, and others, we'll continue it there. I believe that the NRSC, I believe Thune's financing vehicle, which were much of the $70 million or so that Cornyn spent in round 1, have abandoned him. I think D.C. recognizes that it's Paxton's to lose. I think probably Trump recognizes that as well. And as crazy as it sounds, he might come in and endorse Paxton. Even if he sits out or endorses Cornyn, I think it's a toss-up at best. There we are. This is Politics with the Big Dogs. I hope I was able to get that in under the wire. You're listening to Anthony Holm, Politics with the Big Dogs. Please follow us and sign up for our newsletter. Stay informed. Thank you, and God bless Texas.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Learn more about today's guest and hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.